I hope you've enjoyed your day in San Francisco, and thank you for being a part of the first Puppetize live event. Right now, there's great stuff happening in Sydney, and if you want to keep watching a whole lot of Puppet stuff, you can just tune into the live stream. Unfortunately, you can't fly there and make it in time to see it live. I'm Mike Stonke. I was up here earlier. I changed my shirt since then. But what I like to talk about is DevOps and DevOps transformation. I also like to talk on the internet. I say a lot of stupid things, and for some reason, people follow me. I wrote a book a long time ago. If you buy it, I get paid. It's great. If you read it, you'll get a lot of out-of-date information. I also founded the Apple Package Repository. I was one of the people that put that together. And this year, as Padmasree said, I helped author the State of DevOps report. So we're going to talk a lot about the State of DevOps report because scaling was the name of the game from the way that I saw it. So in the past, we've been doing this for 7 years, but apparently we only had pictures of the last 3 reports. We've been doing this for a while, right? We've been talking, but the main point of most of these reports, at least my takeaway, which I'm sure is oversimplified, was that it was all about why. Why does DevOps matter? Why is it so important? How do you convince your leadership that this is what you should be concentrating on? Okay, let me help you convince somebody. Okay, are we pretty much in agreement at this point that DevOps is like an okay thing? Okay, I think we are. And so, to me, it wasn't so much about why anymore. It was, oh my gosh, will somebody please tell me how? Because I'm pretty sure we've established this is great. I have no idea how to get there. None. So who needs to know how to get there? Anybody. Anybody at all. Anyone at all. Anyone at all. All right. So we have a State of DevOps report from 2018. Here's everything you need to know about DevOps. We're moving from spaghetti to ravioli, which sounds delicious. Sidebar, a Pop-Tart is ravioli. Changed my mind. So Nigel wrote this, and he's been at Puppet for a long time. He's an executive, and he's also a certified thought leader. So I started thinking about spaghetti to ravioli. Spaghetti to ravioli. Right? You got this on so many levels. So let's talk about the first key finding from the 2018 State of DevOps report. In a DevOps evolution, there are many paths of success, but even more that lead to failure. Okay, I asked for how do I do this, and what you've told me so far is there's a lot of ways, and most of them don't work. Yeah, thought leadership. So what is failure in this case? Well, failure might be you stagnated. You're not improving anymore. Your rate of improvement has slowed. You have one team that is doing everything correctly and is just awesome, and another team that's holding them back. And therefore, they start to not like that team that's holding them back. Or the team that's being held back says, well, why is that other team getting all the accolades, the praises, the pay raises, the promotions, the pizza parties, whatever it is that you're motivating people with anymore? That's where we start to see cynicism. Team 3, awesome. Team 5, like maybe they're pretty good. Team 1, they're crying a lot. You can use Puppet Insights to graph developer tears. So we kind of looked at all this through all the data. We had thousands of responses. We're sorting through them. We're doing statistical analysis on it. There's actual science that goes on in the back end. It's not just ideas, I promise. And we get to these 5 stages that people went through. And the more mature folks were a little bit further down, or the people that were a little further in their evolution. Sometimes you were smaller and had less obstacles to overcome. Sometimes you were large in one pocket, maybe one business unit was down at stage 4, another one was at stage 2. Success is not evenly distributed. That's where we're at. So I'm going to walk you through almost none of this. Because we don't have time. I have a 25-minute talk. There is a report, and one guy got one. But you can download it. It's available. I think Alana has a few more laying around. There's some on the table up here if you want to grab one later. What I'm going to cover are some of my favorite things out of the report. We're going to do it BuzzFeed style, but we'll get there in a minute. So we're going to scale before we hit cynicism, right? Before we hit cynicism. Well, what the heck is cynicism? Basically, I'm out for myself and I'm a skeptic on this stuff, right? That's what you say. But I'm basically like, haters going to hate. So cynicism is hating is easier than trying. And if that isn't the summary of everything in technology, I don't know what is. Not a key finding, though. So there was not a lot of statistics and analysis around this one. I'm just pretty sure it's right. So we're going to scale. And then there's like 72 definitions of the word scale. I think it's only second to the word set in the English language of all the definitions. Also not true, but there's a lot of definitions to scale. So I want to replicate DevOps success across an organization. I want to take that team 3 in that graph and have the other things look pretty close to it in overall success. If we're saying that that's like the happiness factor, the success factor, delivery velocity, whatever the metric is that you're hoping for in that case, we want it to be better. Okay. Now, when I think about scale, when I think about a lot of things, I like to think about what's the opposite of it. For one, I'm a really big fan of bad ideas. Because if you can figure out what the worst idea, the worst way to solve a problem is, all you have to do is figure out the opposite, and then you might have the best. Right? That's more or less science. So what's the opposite of scale? Heroics. I could have one team that's performing super well, and it might just be that they have a bunch of amazing engineers. They're kicking butt, they're taking names, they're solving problems, they're up till midnight, they swoop in with their capes, and they solve problems, they get all the praise, and then you're like, man, if I only had, 72 more engineers just like this, everything would be fine. Turns out finding 72 more engineers just like that is really hard. And getting them to talk to each other and work together is even harder. So heroics are probably not how we're going to replicate success throughout an organization. If you have a lot of heroes, you should tell them that their mission in life is to no longer be a hero. Like Clark Kent solves problems. Superman, if he's not around, what do? You die. So we go back to this map, right? Okay, we're going to normalize, we're going to standardize, we're going to expand. Okay. Where do you think cynicism enters in this primarily? Skepticism. Where do the haters start? Trick question everywhere. You could be at foundational, you could be at 1, 2. We're going to talk a lot about where that happens. But rather than me walking through each of these stages, like I said, I want to do a survey of just kind of some interesting things that I found, or that we found. But 6 actions to move forward. It was a top 5, and I realized I had an off by 1 error when I was running through my slides this morning. It happens. So number 1, begin with sharing. This is weird, right? I've done nothing, and I'm going to tell everybody about it. So start with sharing. Why do you want to do this? Because if you have a problem, talk about it. One of my favorite tools for a DevOps transformation is called lunch. You go grab somebody that sits on another team, you go eat with them, and inevitably you will talk about a problem, and they will also talk about a problem. And then you could say, if I'd have known this was the thing you cared about, I probably could have made that way easier for you. And they might do that in reverse, and now you have good things going on both sides. Begin with sharing. We found that organizations that share and do things in the open progress faster, they have better results, and people are happier because there's more transparency and trust. What do you do in terms of sharing? It can be something as simple as making your source code available to all teams. It can be allowing all teams to contribute to the tooling. There's an IKEA effect here, right? When you assemble a piece of furniture, you're more attached to it. If you're using a tool that somebody else built, but you put in a patch on it, you're more attached and more likely to use that tool in the future, which now means I've reduced tool proliferation. That's awesome. It means I have more experts on that tool, more people that can contribute to it. That's awesome. All I've done so far is say, hey, I'm not going to close a bunch of stuff down. Okay, that's fairly simple. Hold post-incident reviews. When you have problems, stand up, shout about them, talk about them, share them. Try and do it in a blameless way. I know where I used to work, we'd start everything with, we're not here to assign blame, but we're here to figure out whose fault it was. Which is fine, but if you can do it in a blameless way, you're all going to learn a lot more. And it might not be a root cause analysis, because it turns out the root cause of all technology problems is a human-made an error. There's no question about it. So what you want to do is dive into the process. What could we have learned in a different way? What if we had this data available at this time instead of this time? What do I do to make this not fail in the same way the next time? Number 2. Complexity is if statements. The more variables you have to traverse throughout a process flow or a technology automation action, the more problems you have. More ifs, more problems. Ask me how I know. How many platforms do you think Puppet Agent gets built for? I believe it's 48, and then we test on about 96. So some of the builds get reused on different platforms. It is what I would call a very complicated piece of software to test and validate. I'm always hoping to reduce one, but then people keep using operating systems that I hate, and so we keep testing them. But if we could have fewer of them, we would be way simpler. Our testing would go faster. However, at Puppet, since we're in the abstraction business, our business is to solve that problem so you don't have to. So please don't create that problem for yourselves. Have fewer if statements. Let's just take a modern example today instead of Puppet Agent, because I'm the only one that has to build things for AIX and ARch64 and all sorts of other crazy stuff that no one should have to do. So let's take an example. Let's just say you have Red Hat and Windows. You run 2 OSs, but you run on 4 different clouds, because apparently being cloud agnostic is really important to some people. So just from an image management perspective, I have 8 variables here. I have 8 paths of of things I need to maintain. Okay, that doesn't seem super valuable to me. So if I can only run Windows, I've eliminated half of all if statements in those processes. Great. Now, if I can get down to 2 clouds, and this is not an endorsement of any particular technology, I now have fewer if statements. I have less to deal with. I have fewer complications. I have more time to spend on things that matter to the business instead of, if it's on Google, do this. If it's on VMware, do this. If it's on OpenStack, cry a little bit. If it's on Kubernetes, do something else that no one knows about yet. There's a whole bunch of stuff to work on. How many of you have worked on a process that looked, let's say, like this or way, way worse than this? We'll call it a change control process. Okay? I want to move my spaghetti to ravioli. Come on, this is just the funniest thing ever to me. I don't know. So this is a little more compact. It's got more meat inside of it. It's a little less messy, right? Spaghetti. Ravioli, a little bit simpler. All right, you're reaching. I know it. I know it. But the point is, there's a process here that became cumbersome, became full of bureaucratic red tape for a reason. Things happened that weren't supposed to. Bad things happened. You know why a plastic bag says don't eat this? Because someone did once. And that's what happens with all of these things. Ask why. What was the safety check you were trying to get? Why do I have to wait 2 weeks to get this changed through a process? Why do I have to go to a CAB meeting and talk about it with a bunch of other people that don't understand anything about what I'm saying so they can say, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea? Why? And the thing is, none of those people that are part of that complicated process actually want to make your job more difficult. I assure you, they get as little out of that meeting as you do. But hating is easier than trying. So what you should do is work with your teams on this. When I was a sysadmin in big enterprise, I would sit down with the change control board and say, how do I prove to you that I can make this set of changes without a 2-week waiting period and an approval by my boss's boss? And they said, well, I don't know. And I said, how about I do this thing 15 times without an incident, and I document it and show you how long it takes and what the backout plan is if it goes wrong, and then you let me do it during the day when I want. They were like, oh, okay. That sounds fair. So we did that. And then I did that for about 31 other types of changes because I was tired of working on weekends. Now, did I still ever have to work on a weekend? Absolutely. But for things like a DNS change, I don't want to do that on the weekend. I don't want to plug in a new network port on a weekend. But there were all these things there because there had been outages, because there wasn't a standard way to do that DNS change. All right, I'll write an interface for it. I'll make it so the help desk can do it. There's a lot of ways to solve these problems. So why was it a problem? Well, because we had an outage one time and everything was terrible. Why did we have that outage? Well, somebody typoed an A record. Okay, that happens, I get it. Can I put some safety checks in there? Cool, let's do that. Let's move on. This was the most surprising finding to me in all of the DevOps report for 2018. It makes a ton of sense, but I definitely never thought about it this way. In a software delivery pipeline, the things you should improve first are the things closest to production. So things like deployment patterns, architectural patterns, maybe your testing frameworks. But if you work backwards, let's see, from production to development, right, you're going to get a lot of value, and you start normalizing at the far end of the stack, and you have more variables earlier on. It turns out developers will fix all that development process all the time because they're mad about it, and they hate things that don't work the way they want to. And even if it's not in the sprint, they're just going to go do it. Ask me how I know. I run development teams. So they're going to fix that stuff, but the stuff at the other end requires conscious thought and planning. And if you do that, you can work all the way across and get big gains. There's a whole lot in the report on this, and I'm not doing it justice, so please look over it. Number 5, activate your security team. If your security team is separate, and in a lot of places it is, they need to be part of the technology deployment process. And they need to be there early. Everybody knows you should shift left on this stuff. Okay, that makes sense. But if you're able to work with your security team up front to plan technology, to plan deployments, to plan upgrades, whatever it is you're doing, it means you've accomplished a lot of good things. This is almost a symptom to goodness happening if you're working with your security team. Because it means that you have probably automatable infrastructure, because you can talk about what's going to happen, you can prove what's going to happen. It means that teams are working across functional boundaries. And that's really where the cynicism starts. When one group is awesome and they feel like somebody else sucks, it just breeds cynicism. And so if you're the systems team and you're doing all this stuff, but man, that change control process, if they'd only let me do the stuff I need to do, we would be the best ever. Well, why aren't they letting you do the things you do? Work with them, activate them, tell them this is your goal. Help them help you, right? How many of you have a dashboard up on, around your cubicles, your offices, whatever, that have metrics at all? Anybody? A lot of you have that? We have tons of them. Your metrics say something. Something. But what is it? Why do you have that metric up on the screen? Can you explain it? Can I walk up to anybody in that room and say, what does this mean? Why do I care? If you have a metric, you need to make sure you know the story. Your leadership needs to know the story. Your individual contributors need to know the story. There's a reason you care and display these things. And if you can't articulate it, get rid of it. Those TVs are great for other things. They have to have a good narrative. What questions are you answering? What decisions do you make with this stuff? Why does the metric matter? And when you have metrics that kind of matter cross-department, particularly if you're going, say, outside of IT into a sales arm or a marketing arm or a general administration arm, if you're talking about lines of code or number of merges and all that, they might not tell the same story to those people. What I like to do when when talking about metrics across departments is I convert them to one language that it seems like everybody in the company understands, and that's dollars. If I can say, hey, if we improve this, let's say deployment lead time, we are going to save $300,000 in development overhead tool and waiting around this year. And Mark back there is going to say, $300,000 savings sounds like something I want to do. Is that right, Mark? Okay. So That's the kind of thing you can do when you want to explain things. Now, does he care about the deployment lead time metric? He might. He might not. Does he care about how many deploys I'm doing a day? Maybe, maybe not. Like, those are vanity metrics as far as other people are concerned. The real story is, what's the dollars? How have I translated that? And if you're not in America, what's the euros? Or what's your currency? And like I said, I had an off by 1 error this morning, but I actually had an off by 2 error, so I had a buffer overrun on my array. One of the most interesting findings was that executives have a rosier view of how DevOps is progressing than the teams do below them. This was not surprising to me in any way, just to let you know. I'm kind of in the middle, like I report to executives, but then I also work with individual contributors all the time, and I can see it from both sides, and I can understand there's a disconnect here. So here's some of the data that I pulled out from the survey. If you look at some of the deltas here, you're talking about 30% delta if you round a little bit. When it was only 35% of the team thinks this and you have a 30% delta, you're almost at like 100% error, right? So what's the C-suite doing that the individual contributor isn't seeing, that the team isn't seeing? Or is it the other way around? Well, what happens is information flows in weird ways. When an individual contributor sees a problem, they go to their first line manager and they escalate and they say, "Oh my God, the sky is falling." And that manager says, "Huh, okay." And they go to their boss and they said, "Hey, I think there might be a problem with the sky." And their boss goes to their boss and they say, "Hey, the sky looks a little funny." And their boss goes up to the executive and he says, "Hey, there's a sky." And that's how information gets filtered up through an organization. So maybe that's why there's a big disconnect. But you have to also remember that no one wants to tell their boss all the stuff that's not going right. So they kind of sugarcoat it. They kind of curve it a little bit. We're going to sand off the rough edges. We're going to present it. No, it's fine. Everything's fine. Well, if you want to stamp out cynicism, I recommend being as honest as possible and as truthful as possible. It's way easier to have a conversation about how on that date you're not going to ship with this scope before that date than it is on that date or after that date. You'll breed more transparency. You'll help stamp out cynicism because you're being honest and you're sharing the right things. Now, there are times when people are escalating problems that probably don't need to go all the way up the chain to the C-suite because they can get managed and dealt with before then. That's okay too. One of the things we get asked a lot is, does a top-down DevOps transformation work better than a ground-up groundswell? Whatever you want to call it, grassroots. And I don't know that there's a strong answer of yes or no on which one is best. I can say from my personal point of view, I like to have some success, use the executives to amplify that, and reprioritize that work so that it gets out to the rest of the business. So if you have one team that is that team 3 in our original graph, they should be going to their leadership and saying, "Look at what we're able to do. Can we get time to prioritize that type of work with those other teams so that we can rise all boats?" That's really important. That's where I want the executive help. The executive that just walks in and says, "Hey, I read CIO magazine. It was in the back of the airplane seat, and it was like, do the DevOps. We should DevOps so hard right now." That is rough. Because a top-down mandate, I don't know if you're like me, and I know I am, that when I hear an executive just say, "We're going to do this," with no context, like my cynicism just rises right away. And it's not because I don't trust them, it's because I don't have the context or the understanding that they're trying to share with me. And they have been thinking about this for a long time, and they prepare a presentation, and they've got a strategy to cascade, and they've thought about it a ton. I've heard about it for 15 minutes. It's really hard to buy into that instantly. And that's why executives and individual contributors kind of get misaligned at times. So cynicism happens because you got too much technology, it's too difficult to manage, your processes are crazy, you can't expand to the business because the ITSM or change control board doesn't want anything to do with you, the security team says, "No, this is the way we've always done it, and we're unwilling to change." Infrastructure delivery is just like, one team goes out and just, hey, we run a credit card, we buy some cloud, somebody else needs VMware, somebody else needs Google. Now the Windows people all want to run on Azure, and now everything is the most difficult thing to manage in the world. Therefore, cynicism rises. And you're like, self-service, man, the only thing I can self-service is like getting out of here, because this is terrible. There's cynicism at every step of the way. Your job is to work with each other to stamp that out. Do things like lunch. It's groundbreaking. So in summary, begin with sharing. Share first and share throughout. Remove those if statements, the complexity. Start as close to production as you can. Reevaluate all those business processes and ask why. Why? Your metrics need a story. They need a real story. It doesn't just look cool on the TV. We have a bunch of resources. Unfortunately, this screen is not clickable by you. So I will make sure that I post these slides on SpeakerDeck shortly. I also encourage you, we have the latest report. We have several years of previous research, and they all cover different things. Like, there's a lot of stats and a lot of, if you're doing DevOps, this is an improvement over last year. But we get into, organizational culture, or we get into different leadership styles. There's just so much to peel back and learn from there. And I also really recommend boringtechnology.club. It's my favorite site on the internet right now, which is all about not going after the new shiny every time the new shiny comes out, because it turns out you can solve the problems you have with the technology you have in nearly all cases. It's a really good website. There's also some material on post-incident reviews that Jason Hand wrote, because he's the authority on post-incident reviews, in my opinion. So those are the resources. I hope you've learned a little bit. I hope you've been at least mildly entertained. And I hope that you can think about DevOps as a way to work together instead of a way to be, we're awesome and you're not. I hope you enjoyed most of your day at Puppetize Live. Anyway, you can follow me on the internet. I'll be available in Slack, and I'm going to do one more wardrobe change. So.